45 seconds. Okay. All right. If you're ready to go. Good evening, everybody. We're glad you could be here. Welcome to you who are in the sanctuary, those who are online, and also those who will be watching by way of the recording of tonight. Once again, we continue in our Wednesday night series on the God Corner, and in our winter season, we're focusing upon living with courage. Fear not, living with courage. Now, the reason we have chosen this is because of really the world in which we live. As the culture more and more continues to drift away from the predominant Christian worldview that was in America and the West over the centuries, it is not only becoming one in which we have difficulty, it is becoming a world in which we are more and more seeing anxiety, antagonism, as well as hostility toward us as Christian believers. And tonight, we are going to be focusing somewhat on education and particular issues in that, but our speaker's main area of expertise is in business and how the business model will, in one way or another, control and lead to what the world as we have come to know it and the institutions that we have come to know. Now, as I said last week, as I introduced the scriptural background for our series on Fear Not and Have Courage is the book of Daniel. If you're familiar with the book of Daniel, Daniel as a young man was taken as an exile from the country in which he was born. He was taken to Babylon, which was the predominant empire in that world at that time. As such, being an intelligent person, he was identified as a person who could be trained in, as the scripture says, the literature and the language of the Babylonians. Now, what's clear from that is that the predominant Babylonian culture wanted to train him in the worldview and an understanding of how to think as the Babylonian culture is. Now, Daniel excelled in this, but as he excelled and also walked with the Lord, he went up, so to speak, the level of government to become one of the great advisors to the emperors in two empires. But this, at certain times, meant a choice that he had to make. He had to be one who was faithful to God, who was faithful to the truth of God, and as such, he spoke the truth of God to those, as we would say, in power. Now, this is very important for our day and age because more and more, as we see in the areas of education, at least in America, Christians are being either marginalized or one way or another even seeing what might be called the cancel culture. An example of this is, for example, a teacher in high school in Washington who was a coach was fired for simply kneeling after a football game and praying silently to give thanks to God. Another example is that recently a young man who was in a school in Michigan was expelled for 3 days for simply sharing his faith with another student. And so he was called bullying. Now, these are just examples of more and more in our culture. Now, these are the high school, but our speaker's expertise is more in the areas I said in business and the area of education. His name is Sykes Wilford, and he grew up in a Christian home, and because of that, as he said, he grew up reading much, and he is his degree as a bachelor, he went to the University of Tennessee. He got his master's at Vanderbilt University and his PhD at Tulane University. Afterward, he went into the business world and in academia. He was in Wall Street, and he served on various areas of business. For example, he was in, excuse me, sorry, he was an economist in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, chief international fixed income strategist for Drexel in London, and Chase Manhattan Bank in London, and chief investment officer of Bankers Trust Private Bank, and later CDC Investment Management. Now, he has had an extended career in academics, and as he will share, he will tell us where he has served, as he said, in many ways, to not make the guilty known. In other words, so he's going to share about that. I think that's an appropriate way to put it. And so we're thankful for him. He's also been an author of numerous articles, numerous papers and articles in many publications. He's written or been an editor of 5 different books, of which that, and he's a consultant in the business world for a number of different foundations and other entities. And so tonight we want to welcome Sykes. I just also want to say that our questioner tonight, who will come after Sykes shares, will be Anna Smith, who is the wife of our associate for evangelism, Greg Smith. Anna was educated at Wheaton College and is currently getting her master's at Wheaton College in Illinois. She's also the head of Scholars Hope Academy, Hope Scholars Academy, which is very important here, that she began here in Charleston. So we want to pray, first of all, and thank Sykes as he comes. So as you come, let us open in prayer. Father, I thank you for Sykes, for his journey, for what he will share tonight. And Lord, we pray for the Holy Spirit to fill him and lead him, even as he says he will bring some things that may be hard to understand or that some people may not like tonight. But because of that, Lord, we need courage to stand in a world, Lord, for your glory and honor. We thank you in Jesus' name. So come, Sykes, we want to welcome you. God bless you.
No. Yes. All right, shocking. This is an unusual. Usually, when I'm lecturing at a university or I'm speaking at a conference or something, the light's not as bright. So please excuse me if I can't see exactly what I'm doing. What I wanted to do tonight, and thank you, Bill, for introducing me, is I wanted to talk about the parts of university life that I can speak to, and many things I can't speak to, so I thought we'd avoid those. We all have our own, we probably all have our own perspectives of what is good about university life and not good about university life. When Al asked me to do this, I said, well, I'm not sure what I could add, because it's usually very personal. And I said, what I can do is probably try to explain the business model of universities, because it is very different, looking at people more toward my age, very different than the business model of when we were in school. And if we can understand that, then we can begin to understand some of the things that go on and why, and when we go scratch our heads and say, how can this be? Not from a theological standpoint or not from a standpoint of what we think it should be, but rather from a standpoint of how could this happen and how do we let it happen? Well, I think we'll begin to see that when we understand the business model of universities. So let me begin by saying, of course, I love education. Otherwise, I would not be a professor at the Citadel. And the thing I love about education are the young people. And I think that's important to get my biases out there. So let's begin the conversation. I'm going to give you an outline of the conversation. I know we're supposed to always, when we do a presentation or a speech, we're supposed to tell people what we're going to do, then tell them what we did. Then we'll say, oh, well, I did this. So what we're going to do is look at campuses and how they've changed over the years. And I think we've all got a perspective, so it's something sometimes we no longer recognize. And if we go back a long time ago, when we talk about a God-centered education, all of our campuses were really related to Christianity. And we've come a long way. Is it the right way? That's a different issue, but we have come a path. I wanted to put this book up because it's a very interesting book. When I was thinking about this presentation today, and I remembered this book I had read several years ago called The Victory of Reason. Because here in the West, we take for granted the economic system we have and the reason we have that economic system, that it happened solely in the Western culture of Western Europe and did not happen anywhere else in the world. And anywhere else in the world, we went back to subsistence level. People starved, and we had hierarchical systems that did not really make life very good. It was short and brutal, I think, is the same. However, something happened in the West, and that something happened in the West, I believe, came out of Christian culture. Now, there are lots of analysis of what happened in the West that did not happen in the rest. Wonderful book, by the way, The West and the Rest. But one of the things that was important in that development was also the development of reason in the church, very early, and how that developed and allowed us to further develop capitalism. So on this conversation, back to outlining the conversation, moving from a very Christian-focused education to maybe some stories of what we're seeing today and whatever the path that could be. I'm going to have to put my glasses on, folks, because I can't see what I'm saying. So you excuse me, because I only do these for reading, and then I have a real problem when I look out there. What bothers us today is depending upon the scale of acceptance. Some people are very willing to accept what we have. And so there are many things in university that bother me that may not bother you. There are many things that don't bother me that I would find atrocious. But so we don't know exactly where you are on the scale, and I don't think I could pinpoint where any one of us are on the scale. So what I'm going to try to do for our discussion is focus on free speech, which is an issue in universities today. To me, this is shocking. Let's go back to the book about Age of Reason and the development of Western civilization, that we would have an issue of free speech, but we do. And so I thought I would start this part of the discussion off by telling you a story. This individual is that I'm going to describe his transgression. He's a full professor. He's well known, not like a fly-by-night like me, but this guy's really well known. He's a real deal at a very famous university somewhere in the northeastern part of the United States. And this individual was accused on a Twitter of racial slurs in his class. Now, this is full professor, tenured, completely respected, gives speeches all over, advisor to this, advisor to that. But there was a Twitter account that accused him of a racial slur. Well, that happens. But what really was distressing was when he went and said, no, I never said these things, to his department chair, and then to the dean, and then to the provost, they said, well, that's your problem. So he had to go hire a lawyer. I think he was out $20,000 already. University didn't back him, and no one really investigated whether he said this or not, because it was now on Twitter, it was everywhere, and people were going to organize demonstrations. So then, luckily, when they were just getting ready to write the big article about this racist teaching, the editor of the newspaper for the school said, maybe we ought to go ask some students who are actually in class. And they did. So the article came out. This was all false. This was all totally created. But from the point of him, he had no backing from the faculty. He had no backing, not from the faculty. I shouldn't have said that. He had no backing from the administration of the university. Now, as we get through this discussion, keep that in mind. How could that occur? When I went to school, it was yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. It is not that way today. Then I want to look at value of tuition dollars because this is the business model aspect. So I'm skipping a lot of the other kinds of cultural things that I don't have anything to add. So we'll start with a little bit on free speech, and then we'll move toward the business model of education. Now, you know, when I was young, I used to poke fun at the pottery classes. But now more and more we're expected to accept kids coming out of school with stuff that doesn't allow them to actually compete in the economy. It doesn't allow them. I'm not talking about STEM, which is big right now, versus liberal arts. I'm a liberal arts guy. Yes, I teach at a business school, but every degree I have is in the College of Liberal Arts. What bothers me that I see we have young people that can't read and write properly. I guess they can read. They can't write properly. They've never had a course in Shakespeare. That bothers me a whole lot more than they've not had a course in economics. But then they wonder why they get themselves in trouble so much financially when they've never had the basic maths to deal with problems in society. So that's, I guess, what I'm getting at, that you can actually get a degree and you can graduate cum laude in something or the other that you can choose what you want to describe. It's not an issue of STEM versus non-STEM. Then the other thing I think we need to look at is if graduates, that's my point, they can graduate without ever reading Shakespeare. You can actually get a degree in English from some schools and not having read Shakespeare. It's pretty shocking. So it's an aside. Now, this is the aside that I think is important. I'm drawing on observations from many different schools. So nothing I say in here you can attribute to any one of those schools, okay? But I am going to draw on observations from many different schools. So I've given you a list of all the schools I'm somehow involved in, or have been. Yes, I am really old. That's the point. But in my career, I've either gone to these schools, my wife's gone to these schools, or my children, we paid tuition for these schools. And you see that they're in different parts of the world, and then I've taught at different universities in different parts of the world. So some of these observations may come from Europe. They may not come from the United States. But I thought that was important so you've got an idea that when I talk about something, and I guess my last little line there, stories noted do not refer to one university unless stated otherwise in public records, period. So you can't put a story to a school. I don't think that would be very appropriate for me to do. So back to the outline of the conversation. Let's talk about academic freedom. Bill started off with a couple of examples at the high school level that is occurring. Well, in academia, this is occurring. And luckily, there are people out there fighting this battle every day. And one of the groups is called FIRE. And I should ask my wife what's it stand for. She writes the checks for FIRE. Freedom. She told me and I wasn't going to forget. Thank you. Individual rights in education. This is a group of hippies, all right? Yes. This is a couple of some sort of hippie types that they were out there protesting when they weren't allowed to have free speech in the 1960s and 1970s. And then the world is turned upside down, and they're now having to go protect the people that they used to have felt like that they were beating up on me, because as the world turned upside down, they found that this is very unpleasant. So I didn't ask if this was going to work, but we're going to try here. No, skip verification. Okay, this may not work. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm not connected to the internet. So I have now totally messed up my presentation. Is there a professional in the audience? Would you all, I don't think you want to see my emails or how I put this presentation together or my Citadel stuff. You don't want to see any of this. I don't know where all of this has gone. Is Mike around? Is it back? Okay. I cannot do this. Apparently we don't have a link for me to do this, but I wanted to show you a picture. I was going to go to their website. Every year they put out, at Fire does, the awards of the worst abusers of free speech at universities. So it's really worthwhile actually going to this website and looking at it. But one of the ones that has won an award so often for free speech is of the 10 worst schools for free speech was Syracuse. And I thought, well, what an interesting school, because they have part of their whole statement is about freedom of inquiry, growing the mind. Yet they seem to do quite the opposite. Now, I don't want to beat up Syracuse because it's just one of many. In fact, if this link worked, the first one that would have come up was where I went to school. So we're not beating on anybody else, but it's well worth doing. I don't think we have an internet connection, so I should have talked about that earlier.
Do you want me to try and do it, or do you want
No, it's all right. I don't think we can use it at this point. I apologize. It was my fault. So if you are at home or so forth and you can see this, it's really going to the Fire website and looking at just examples of free speech. Now, what's wonderful about Fire, there is no politics. They're mad at conservatives. They're mad at liberals. They just want people to have the right to speak freely and grow young people's minds with inquiry. So that one, I think, is very important on the free speech issue. But we need, the one thing that I think we all need to understand is, how could this happen? And to me, that is the business model. And so let me begin looking at the cost of education. Now, if you've written tuition checks for your kids, you know how much it costs. It's expensive. So let me give you some numbers. I'm an economist, so we have to have numbers, and we have graphs. Can you see this graph up here? The blue one is the real cost. So it's all this is adjusted for real dollars. So the blue and the red line will cross at today, because the red line is a line in nominal dollars. There's no scale, if you'll notice. And the blue line is a line in real dollars. So basically, public four-year institutions in the U.S., these are public institutions, the tuition has increased 25 times over the past 50 years. 25 times. Now, but in real terms, because there's been inflation, that's only 400%. So the cost of education has gone up 400% at public institutions. That's tuition. Doesn't count the other stuff. For private institutions, you'll be happy to know, if you're sending your children to a private institution, it's not as bad. It's only gone up 300% tuition in real terms. Now, what does that mean in real terms? Well, let's look at an example. Let's look at a car. A car is up 3.5 times, an average car, nominal dollars, not real dollars, nominal dollars. Are today's cars better than they were 50 years ago? I know they're a lot better than the one I had when I was going. It's a lot better car than that. Now, not near as much fun, I'll tell you. My car today is not near as much fun as the one I had 50 years ago. But then again, oh, wait a minute, was that the one I had to sell to go to school? And then I had that awful car, and my wife still married me? Unbelievable. So, but in real terms, inflation-adjusted terms, the price of a car has actually fallen. They're better and they're cheaper than they were 50 years ago in real terms. Where college education is up 400% over 50 years ago. So I think if you look at it in terms of cars and compare that to college education, you say, what are we getting for our money? Now, okay, look, you could think of cars, well, that's just something we use, and I've talked about the average car, but college education, that's something we consume, and as we've gotten wealthier, we can consume more of it, so we are wealthier. How much wealthy are we per capita? Because what matters is per capita, each of us individually, relative to 50 years ago. On a per capita basis, we're about twice as wealthy as we were 50 years ago, based upon the way we measure things at the national statistics, which, by the way, we're much wealthier than that, but we can't even, that's a whole different discussion. Price for a car is down in real terms. Tuition is up 3 to 4 times in real terms. Maybe college education is that much better today. Maybe cars are not really safer and better built and easier to handle, and by the car standard, college education costs are up 600 to 800% in real terms. That means it's going to cost you to send your child, my grandchild, to school, to college, at these rates, 8 times in real dollars more than it cost my generation. This is, I hope this startled you, because I had no idea it was this bad when I started looking at the data. Okay, how does this make sense? So let's look at the business model of education to see how we got here. Now, you can say one of the things could be the professors make a lot of money. Well, let's take a look at that. This is from bestcollege.com analysis of professor salaries. Full-time college professors made an average of $140,000 in 2021 a year. That sounds pretty good. But this statement said, despite rising student costs and executive compensation, professors remain stagnant, meaning professors actually, in real terms, have not had a pay raise in 50 years. So when you're paying that tuition, you're not paying for the person that's lecturing. So if you've not had a pay raise in 50 years, do you think you're going to have the same quality product? I'll let you make the judge, be the judge of that. So despite rising student costs and executive compensation, professors' pay has remained stagnant. Well, full professor salaries in nominal terms went up some 8 times in 50 years, but in real terms, they're actually down. They make less in real terms than they did 50 years ago, even though per capita income of the population has doubled. So professors have same real income. Average person, Joe in the street, has twice as much in per capita, so per capita ends up twice as much. Yet professors, so it's not the professors that are really expensive. So when we get mad at those professors, they're not the cost. Staffing at major universities. Now this is very interesting. This is from 2010, a number from 1985 to 2010. Basically, other professions seem to be where the money went. Faculty is about 30% of the cost of a university. This was 1985 to 2010. Other professionals grew by 50%. So instead of the money being spent on the faculty, and I'm not complaining because I'm not a real professor, so I'm not talking about myself, but what we did was spend more money on other professionals. And I doubt if it's changed except to have more other professionals. So we may ask the question, what are those other, some inconsistencies here. We're not paying the professors, yet our costs are going through the roof. Costs have skyrocketed. Real terms, product and output, I'm going to argue the product is not better than it was 50 years ago. Growth in other professionals, and I have to tell you a story. This is from one of those schools, and one I'm got pretty good knowledge about it. So there's the law school where this person started teaching, 50 years ago, let's say, 40 years ago. And when he went to that school, the law school had a dean, and it had an assistant and a secretary. That was the staffing of the school. And then everything else with the professors and the students, and there's the building stuff, but basically the staff was 3 people. One of them a secretary, one of them a dean, and an assistant. Not assistant dean, assistant. That same school, when this story was told to me, this has been about 4 or 5 years ago, had 14 assistants. Now, what do those 14 assistants do? Well, it's very important to fill out all these forms you've got to do to get the money to get the students to be able to have the money to pay the tuition to go to school. Because all these students in this school, their tuition was probably being paid on loans. Who pays for education? Travel back in time. Who paid for education? What did they care about? State legislatures used to pay for quite a bit of public education. It's reduced dramatically today. State legislators pay a very small percentage for most public schools now. The GI Bill of Rights. It was very important that Bill of Rights, that money that came, Bill of Rights, is that the right word? Yeah, I guess that's the right word. The GI Bill, it worked for the vets. The GI Bill was very important for educating a group of people that would have never had access to universities. So we could look at that as how. Then thirdly, we could look at payments and look at parents. Payments. Parents were the payees. Now, if you're a parent and you're paying for your child's education, what do you care about? You care about the quality of the output. What is my child going to get out of this education? Is this child going to get something that is worth me writing the check? So the bulk of the money actually came in education from parents, or people donating money back to their university and give their name on the building. So who pays today? Well, first of all, the payment for tuition and then other stuff. Grants and donations make up some funding. Some funding for state colleges via state taxes, but as I said, as a percentage, that is down. At least schools I know about, it's way down as a percentage of the payments. Student aid, which is about $100 billion. That's a big number. And $11 billion for the GI Bill. You know, veterans still can take advantage and go to school. And at the Citadel, we have quite a few veteran students. By the far way, they are really good students. Like to see them there. So where does the tuition come from today? Where does it go? Well, first of all, where it goes, think about those 14 staff that are needed at that law school. Where does the money come from? Consider the outstanding student loan debt. The numbers on the screen. And that is a number that is not gross, because some of it's been paid off. Recently, not much. Hey, I'm not against this. I had to borrow money to go to school. So who borrows the money? Now this is important. Who borrows the money now? The parent go to the bank to borrow money to pay the tuition? Actually, the student borrows the money. Who helps the student borrow the money? Did you wonder what those other 14 administrators were doing? A large portion of it is meeting the regulations so they can borrow the money. So the client today is different than the client when we went to school. The client when we went to school were the parents that wrote the check. The client today is the student. And one of the things you learn if you want to survive in business is you make the client happy. The client is a warm body. If I don't put the warm bodies into my school, I don't get the tuition check, and I can't pay for the staff. So my role, if I'm running a school right now, is to get warm bodies to pay the tuition. The client is always right. No question. The client is right. If you're in business and you don't pay attention to your clients, you will not survive unless you have a monopoly guaranteed by the government. We teach that Economics 101. It's just the way the world is. The client's always right. If the student is the client, think about that. Warm bodies are needed should be the advertisements of schools today. Now, as Bill said, I may say things you all might not like, and you may not agree with. I hope you don't agree with it. But, you know, instead of saying we are the best of the best of the best, maybe I should be saying warm bodies are needed to fill up the dorm. Now, safe spaces, good gyms, great swimming pools. Safe spaces. Can you believe these things exist? I can't. It does, though. Great football, great basketball. I got nothing against basketball. I was watching the basketball game just the other night with my wife. We like our alma mater schools. My alma mater's football hadn't been too good lately, so. And unfortunately, I went to two schools that have worse football than the two, so it's really bad. But I love this. I think it's important. And I also, not responsible for your actions if you agree to sign here for our speech code, so you don't make anybody mad about having to think. Discipline. Well, hey, don't discipline too much. If you discipline too much, I'm not having fun. So I thought I'd take a look at LSU, but I can't because I don't have the internet connection. I apologize. What I was going to show you at LSU, but I do have an advertisement at LSU. Just from the website. Nothing against LSU at all. LSU University Recreational Center provides a modern and energetic atmosphere conducive to the needs of our students and members. UREC has a 250,000 square foot innovative and comprehensive recreational facility featuring cardio equipment, strength management, fitness studios, high-level programming, and swimming pools. I don't know what my swimming, we really did not have that when I was, this is pretty good. I was thinking about getting young again and going to LSU. They got pretty good football some years. Now, what I was going to show you was that, so the question is, what is needed to learn math or economics or English literature or Spanish language studies or accounting? Is that pool what we need, of the 250,000 square feet? But if you want to get warm bodies to come to LSU, what do you got to give them? Pleasure. Because college is really about what? 4 years of having a good time. And at LSU, I guarantee you'd have a good time. In my best southern Louisiana accent. Now, what I'd like to do here is show you, I was going to do a link. So for those of you at home, if you get this, you can do a link. And just go to LSU sports facilities, and you're going to see page after page or screen after screen of all the facilities. It is amazing. This is where we spend our money. Now, The state legislature probably, well, they might pay for some of it because, they really like football. But so then just in case you think I'm picking on LSU, I was then going to go to Tennessee where I went to school, and we got more pages. We got more pages so we can get more people to come to our school. Of good times. Now, we all loved college. It was all good times. But I need to wrap this up by making the point. And I'm going to make a point on rankings because we all love our rankings, right? I mean, I love my rankings. I like where my kids went to school. That was very important. I'm just as good. So think about rankings of universities. Now, I'm going to choose the UK because there's 3 schools that just came out, the top 3 schools in the UK. And St. Andrews came out ahead of the ones we know, Oxford and Cambridge. So you're talking about bragging rights for my daughter. Hey, I could beat up my brother. I could beat up my husband. I'm ahead of them. That's real bragging. What is it? What does it mean? Well, it turned out they changed the way they did the scoring so that people are happier at St. Andrews than at Oxford. What does it mean, these rankings? I use that because I don't think they mean as much as we think they mean. And like I said, I like to brag on mine. I'm just as bad as anybody else about bragging. Well, my son went X. My daughter-in-law teaches at X. So I'm guilty of this, of false pride. I think it's appropriate that we talk about false pride in this conversation. But ranking stories, the reason I did put the ranking stories is because I have a story that I really love. And I'm close to this university, but I won't tell you which one it was. Their business school was on a roll. They were looking at to be one of the best business schools in the country. They were up there in the top 10. All of a sudden, the real thing with their GMAT scores, they were higher than almost anybody else other than maybe Harvard or Duke. So they had made it until it was realized that they had lied on their GMAT scores to get in the top 10 and their rankings. So what do those rankings mean? Rankings, one more way to compete for what? Warm bodies. Who's going to write that check? Borrow that money, write that check, warm bodies. At all costs, the logic is today at a university is you make the students happy because you need those warm bodies in the classroom because you need them to pay tuition. What is happy for the university? A paying student or a government-paid student? Warm body, filling some quota. And one asks why we have safe spaces, protests, demands from students that seem illogical, cancel culture that's accepted on campus, racially divided graduation classes, and most importantly, administrations who simply give into anybody demonstrating per that tweeter conversation about that particular professor. I think it's pretty simple. The student has got to be happy because we need that warm body in our school. All right, I want to thank you very much for this. I ask you one question. Suppose there were no student loans and you paid the tuition, not through some third party called the government. Would you accept that output? Thank you. I hope I've irritated people. I hope I have lots of questions. And I hope I've given you some idea of the transition in the way the world was. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. It was enlightening, a little scary, and my brain hurts. But like I like to tell my students, I haven't done a good job unless your brain hurts. So I think you did a good job.
Oh, well, thank you.
A couple questions I have. First of all, you talked about free speech, and we've been speaking about that a lot through this series. What would you say to helping students come into this world where speech is getting limited? How would you encourage your students at the Citadel? What strategies would you give them?
But by the same token, no examples I've used for the Citadel, by the way.
Right.
No, my students, I encourage them to ask any question about anything. But then again, I can afford to do that because it doesn't matter if I get fired. But the problem is there are especially young professors who they're going into this career that would like to be able to ask questions that would engender conversations they cannot do. I think that students should just ask those questions and get involved and stand up for what they believe is important. That's the hope. Because you talked about hope before in your Hope Academy. That is the hope that the students themselves, this next generation of students, will fight back against this.
Are you seeing examples of that?
Am I seeing? Again, Citadel's a different kind of institution.
Absolutely.
Am I seeing examples of that in other institutions? Yes, I do know. I can't say where. I do know one classroom and one professor that talked about this new group of freshmen she had that's a pretty exceptional group. These are some of the best of the best of the best. And inquiry from them was they wanted to gobble it up. So there is hope.
Wonderful. And we're talking about courage this semester. If you were to speak to a professor at one of the unnamed universities, let's say in the East, what would you say to give them courage to do their job this year, especially if they're one who are not facing retirement? They have 20 more years in the institution. What would you say to give them courage?
Just remember, you can get a better job outside. I don't think that's what you wanted to hear. No. But if you don't have alternatives, I'm an economist. Okay, many professors that work in universities in fields where they're not being paid much at all do it just because they love the students. And I think that's very important. I think it's very sad that they have to circumvent what they could do for the students because of the cultural changes. But I would say remember that the students are the most important part of what you do. And yes, but it may mean that you have to give up that profession and go somewhere else.
You spoke about the liberal arts, inquiry, the importance of Shakespeare, but there's a great gap right now between those who want to go into the liberal arts and those, there's a lot of focus on just getting the job. We need to just train workers for the job, very much for the economy.
Oh, you don't want to get me started on that. No, again, being an economist, you think, and a business guy, we've got to train all these people. Now, when a student comes to me and says, I want to go into finance, I want to play in the big leagues, okay? Then I sit there and talk about the things they'll have to take. And there are all these STEM courses. And I guess the new word's data science, statistics. So statistics, math, statistics, but you've also got to be able to communicate. If you can't communicate, you can't get anything accomplished. So go to the English department and make sure you have a solid foundation in English and learn how to write. And by the way, when you turn in a paper that I can't read, don't come back to my class because you don't write well enough. Now, I'll be fair, I don't write well either. But somehow I think, than some of the students today. So I think it's if it depends on what you want to do, of what you've got to get, but I think it's very important. The liberal arts education gives you the ability to look across ideas and to bring them together in a way that is much more meaningful. In my experience, in my career, and the people I worked with, most every person I worked with when we were creating new financial products on Wall Street, most all of these people were educated in liberal arts disciplines. Math is a liberal arts discipline as well. It was not what we call STEM. Now, I had a lot of guys that worked for me during my career that had PhDs in nuclear physics. Experimental nuclear physics was another one I liked, and nuclear engineering. So, yes, those people had great skills in those areas, but they're in a silo. You want to be involved in that kind of, even that world. You needed these skills, but if you had a liberal arts approach to it, you could do things that others couldn't do.
Mm-hmm. It broadens your base in a lot of ways.
You think more broadly.
So you've talked about quality of output. I have a sophomore in college, one going to college next year, As a parent, and we have several parents watching, how do I know what the quality of the output is of the institution? If the rankings really don't matter, how do I know that my child's getting a good education?
I don't know, look at where the university places them. One just solid economic measure would be where they're able to go for whatever they want to do. Is what they want to do to go to a next level in their profession at a master's or a doctorate level, or and see if they can help place students there. Take a look and see if their goal is to go out in the workforce, and to see how successful they are at getting in a position and being able to function in the workforce. That's a big issue. A big issue is you can get a job, but can you function at that level? I mean, a real problem would be, suppose you're an accountant, and you got an accounting degree, you think you've got a really good program, but your students don't function at Deloitte's. Deloitte's didn't come back and visit you for the second time. They don't need you anymore. So I think you take a look at what placement is and is not. But again, when you take a look at the data, you got to be very careful what you look at.
I heard you say that basically the 18 to 22-year-olds are running the institutions in some ways, in terms of they're the clients, they're the ones that are paying. Yeah. So we're catering to what their desires are. And because of the training they've had up until the institution, a lot of their desires would not match some of what we believe to be quality education.
Well, that would be subjective on my part of quality education.
Okay.
But yes, if you have children that have gone through schools and they're not well educated, but they're told that they're successful, they're told that they got straight A's, they're told that they're really bright, and the ones that actually succeed are the ones that got knocked down 15 times and got up, which is I think pretty important. And those are the kids I see that actually make it all the way. And I think that we do damage to students when we don't tell them the fact of life. One of the things I loved about living in the UK at that time, we knew where our children, from the time they were in the equivalent to the first grade, where they ranked. Which class they were in, where they ranked in that class, and which class. Was it the first, second, third, fourth, or fifth best? I love that. Now, you might say it's a little hard on Johnny if he's down at the bottom of the bottom group, but he doesn't want to get kicked out of the school either. So little Johnny tries to find a way to climb. I think that's important, and that is antithetical to a lot of people's way they think education should be. I'm not very nice, maybe.
You like to stir the pot a little bit.
No, on that one, I like to, you should know what your competition is. I don't think I should be playing tennis on the professional tour.
So a good dose of reality.
A reality
for all of us.
check.
So as a Christian, where do you find hope and courage as you look at this? It looks a little dismal, the scenario that you've painted for us for the universities.
Oh, no, there's hope.
Okay, well, where is it? Where do we find it?
Well, the hope and courage, no, you as a Christian, how do I deal with some of this? I pray a lot. I do that for any issue that I confront that I don't understand. But there is hope, and I think the hope is because people are waking up that the system doesn't function well as it is now. I guess I heard someone say, really, are we going to let 18-year-olds run this place? That if we had that mentality, we wouldn't want our 18-year-old running the place. We want someone guiding that 18-year-old so that they can become a functioning adult. And so if we can get society to begin to say, wait a minute, there's a problem here, we don't want an 18-year-old. But right now, the 18-year-olds who we're catering to.
Okay. My last question's a really, really important one.
Okay.
Are you ready for it?
Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned that your earlier cars were more fun to drive. What was your favorite car that you drove?
63 Chevy Super Sport.
All right.
That my brother got for me because I couldn't afford anything. And I had to sell it.
For the education.
Need some money.
Well, it sounds like a good choice that you made.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Bill?
Well, we've got a couple more minutes. I'm wondering, does anybody have questions?
Okay?
I agree with everything that you said about the value of a good liberal education. But how do you deal with the integration of practice side of life? Where do we get plumbers from? Where do we get mechanics from? And how do you integrate that kind of practical local education with a good liberal arts education?
Well, I think we were, I'll repeat the question. The question was professions of plumbers, mechanics, and how does that fit with a good liberal arts education? I don't think we should send people to quote unquote universities to learn how to be a good mechanic. It's a waste of their time and the money of society, and they would be much better off not doing that. And there are parts of the world that don't believe that you actually have to go to college to be able to function in society, and one can do well. Is that the question you were asking?
I think it is, but I'm just wondering, still, to be functional in our society today, you still need to be able to read. In other words, if the plumber's going to, or if you're going to do it yourself, fix the sink in your house, more than likely you're going to need to be able to read something. You at least need to be able to look in the phone book and find out where you can get plumbing supplies.
No, I think a really good question. I'm going to try to. You were making the statement that we really need. Everybody needs to have a sufficient education to be able to be functionally literate. No, I would totally agree. But I don't think you have to go to universities to get that.
So what would we do in terms of telling the general public who should and who shouldn't have an education? In other words, what we're reading today about the huge amount of student debt that is outstanding and how the federal government is going to pay off some of these loans and is in the process of paying off some of these loans. What I'm interested in what your thoughts are as to how we select out the people who don't need to read Shakespeare or know Shakespeare that well from the people who need to be able to repair a car or repair the plumbing in your house.
Okay, there are a lot of things going on in this question. So one of the questions is, should everybody have to be exposed to Shakespeare if you're going to be if you're going to have a trade as opposed to a white-collar job? You want to use that term? Maybe not. I would hope they are. I would hope they were exposed to Shakespeare as I was at a sophomore in high school, as a junior in high school, and as a senior in high school. I think what we're addressing is at the college, at the university level in this, and the question is why can you get out with a university degree and not having done some of the basic things in math and science and literature? I don't know if that answered your question. I hope so.
So if I was listening to you too, one of the reasons is because you're adapting more to an 18-year-old than what an 18-year-old wants. He may not be interested in Shakespeare.
Oh, no. In fact, you've got two forces on, let's say, Shakespeare. You've got two forces going on. It's hard, so I don't want to do it as an 18-year-old. And the second force that's going on, there's a belief that this person didn't have anything to say to us, except in the fact most of the words we use, he thought up. But other than that, he doesn't have much to talk to because he's an old, dead, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so it's not as powerful as this person. I'll give another story. And again, from one university that is, we know pretty well. So there was going to the university to interview for it, and basically, do I want to go to this university? And I remember the analysis of this boy was, I don't think I'm going to go here as much as I like this school because they don't even have a course on Napoleon. He was interested in Napoleon and Napoleonic history. They don't even have a course undergraduate on Napoleon. Oh, but they do have one on I don't know, is it black female science fiction writers? He actually knew science fiction, and he knew the one black female science fiction, and that's listed as a course that you can take in the catalog, but nothing on Napoleon. Now, nothing against that, but you know what's going on. Some professor, I have written on the one, and we're going to offer a whole course on it. But to do that, you have to eliminate something else being taught and provided. So part of the thing is which course would have better prepared a student? Did that answer your question?
I think so. Well, we want to give you a gift here. Thank you. This is
Thank you very
what we
much.
give to our speakers.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much.
And, I'm very excited about what you have to say and the effect of it, and the quality of what's happening. We hope to hear from you some more.
Oh, sure. But I think also that Susan said that there would be a couple of pictures of books that I thought would be interesting. And I guess that'll be on the screen or something. But one of those books was, if I may.
Yeah, please.
One of those books is something I do tutorials other than normal teaching for our very best students. And most of these students that I do these tutorials for, I do them in economics. They've not had any economics. They're mostly math, science, engineering type students, but they're really good students. And the idea is to broaden them through 4 tutorials with full professors in their specialty. And my tutorial, I always start this tutorial off in economics with a book by Adam Smith. And you say, oh, Wealth of Nations. Well, actually, it's not. It's the book he wrote that sort of sets the basis of a society where the wealth of nations can occur. And it's called The Theory of Moral Sentiments is the book, but it's too darn hard to read. The book I'm recommending is an economist who read that, and he said, how Adam Smith changed my life. I think it's a great read, but it's a blending of moral philosophy with economics, which so I think that's an interesting book for this talk. And then the second book I had recommended was Don't You Love It When Your Brain Doesn't Function at All? Help me, my wife. You don't remember either. Well, you never saw it. Anyway, I'll give you a clue. This was a book about those two, the fire people. Now I remember. The Coddling of the American Mind. A wonderful book that those two, the folks from fire, they're very much involved in the free speech thing, wrote a book and said, well, what does this do to the young person's mind? And I thought it was great because one of the people really does have to use psychoanalyzing. So one is a psychologist and the other one, an old hippie, if I remember, a lawyer, I think, old hippie. And this book tries to address the question, well, what happens if children never face any difficulty? What has happened? And then what do they expect? What do they look for to solve their problems? And then why should we be surprised at what we've got? Anyway, I think that's a book that everybody would enjoy. It's an easy read, lots of fun.
Very good.
Wish I could remember the name of it.
Well, let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you for just helping us to understand in a better way the dynamic of what is taking place in our culture and the educational system. And Lord, as Sykes has said, Lord, the hope is really you, an answer to prayer. May we as a people pray for our nation, for the institutions, Lord, of learning, and may you grant, oh God, your people to have greater courage to stand up and speak the truth in love so that the Lord Jesus Christ can be glorified. We thank you now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. God bless you.
In the darkness, we were waiting. You saw to the other side, knowing this was our salvation. Jesus, for our sake, you died. Praise the Father, praise the Son, praise the Spirit, three in one. God of glory, majesty, praise forever to the King of Kings. And that you rose, all of heaven held its breath till that stone